Hello and welcome to Asking Canadians, continuing series of Delve In with Asking Canadians. I'm Kyle Kinsey. Joining me today will be Nick Drew, CEO of Fuse Insights. And I will actually pass it to Nick to kind of give a little bit of background on himself.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm Nick. I run the small research agency Fuse Insights based in Toronto. We've been in existence for about 4 years. We work with a range of clients across the tech, non-profit and B2B spaces, amongst others.
All right, Nick, thanks for joining us today. So what we're having here is we've recently run some questions across the Asking Canadians panel for this research piece. Those questions focus on COVID and how Canadian workers are adjusting to the changes and then how and where they work. First off, why these types of questions?
So I think it's unsurprising that really the pandemic and the disruption arising from it has really been a focus of much of our work this year. Clients have obviously really wanted to understand the impact that COVID-19 and all that disruption has had on consumer behavior, on consumer mindsets. We've also been working with clients to understand how business and how various industries have been adapting as well. I think it's been a real topic of interest for us too at Fuse because it's that overlap of research that we're working on and insights that we're getting from data, and also what we're seeing and what we're living ourselves. And so when you tease out those insights, when you see those behaviors, they feel very truthful and I guess very real for us. So the reason that we focused on these particular questions is because there have been a lot of headlines, a lot of stories focusing on the changing nature of work in particular. So things like Zoom fatigue, how we're all moving to remote working and so on. And I have to say that personally, I haven't seen a huge amount of data behind those headlines and behind those stories. So we wanted to use this opportunity to really focus on the working experience and how Canadians' working lives have changed, their thoughts on that and so on. And so as you touched on, we asked a few questions of Canadians in employment, whether that's full-time, part-time or self-employed, about this working reality that they're living through.
Yeah, and that's great. It's obviously a heavy topic to all of us as we're all living through it. I know, obviously, with yourself, you've had to change your habits as well, having a newborn on your end. So I'm sure that that's obviously changed your life dramatically, and how you work from home, and kind of everyone's life isn't being able to put on pause because at the same time you still have to now work and kind of carry on in your day to day. All right, Nick, and now tell me, what did you learn from this data specifically, and kind of what were the key takeaways?
So I think the first thing really was that we were able, from the data, to be able to put some figures to the headline around this big shift to remote working. They're probably not definitive, and we might want to rerun it with much larger sample size and stricter quotas on the sampling. But our data suggests that of people who didn't work from home before COVID, more than half of them now are having to work from home at least some of the time. So there is a significant proportion of the population who really have had to make that shift from not working from home at all to working from home either all the time or for a significant portion of their time. We also did see, though, that the majority of those Canadians who are working from home now would like to be able to do so permanently, even after the disruption from COVID-19 has ended. It's definitely not universal. About a quarter of those that we surveyed disagreed, so suggesting that they would really rather not work from home in the future. But despite the challenges that come with working from home, which were a couple of the other findings we had, 6 out of 10 Canadians who currently work from home would want to continue doing so in the future. Here, though, that we've seen in other research that we've done with clients and that we've done ourselves over the course of this year, that balance is key, though. And I think when you see kind of the press coverage talking about the future of the office is totally remote, we tend to see that very few people want to work from home all the time. And really, most people would like the option of doing so maybe 1, 2, or even 3 days a week. But there is still that idea of being in the office for some of the time, as well as that option of working from home. So the second, I guess, area of findings that we had was really around the upheaval, both in terms of personal attitudes, but then also in working style as well. So we've heard a lot about Zoom fatigue, or I feel that I've heard a lot about Zoom fatigue. You know, this idea that we're all sick of video calls because we have them non-stop, back to back all day long. And really, the results from the questions showed that 4 out of 10 Canadians working from home are fed up of video meetings. And a third said that they're currently spending too much of their working day in meetings. And again, this is interesting both because of what it's not as well as what it is. So obviously, you know, these are significant numbers of people working from home, perhaps working from home all the time, who are just sick of their only interaction with colleagues, with clients, with peers being through a video screen. And there is, of course, that pressure as well that comes of being on video that you don't get when you're on the phone. You know, if we were doing this call by phone, I could be wearing my gym jams and I could be perfectly happy, as opposed to, you know, having made at least a little effort. But then at the same time, the results show that it's not true for everyone. Not everyone is saying, right, I am sick of video meetings. You know, in fact, the majority didn't say that, and 2/3 didn't say that they're spending too much of their working day in meetings. So although some of that may be because of the nature of the work that they're doing, you know, they're not having so many meetings, there are obviously people who do still appreciate that contact, that interaction, even if it's through a video screen or through a phone call.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that too, I find, especially in my video calls day to day, that I do like when it's kind of one-on-one personal like this, where you can kind of, it's easy to connect. But in those meetings where you have 10, 15 people,
Yeah.
it is very hard to raise your hand, be noticed, because you feel like you're constantly speaking over someone. And I feel like those are the meetings that it's a little harder because you do feel like, why am I in this when my voice isn't being heard?
And it's much tougher to remain engaged than it would be to be in the same meeting face to face. There's definitely a layer of interaction or a layer of engagement that's being lost by the fact that you are essentially sat in front of a computer screen, not actually in the company of people. The final area really that we saw insights from this data was in some of the other shifts that remote working has had in terms of how people work. And I think it's fair to say that this final area is probably a little more concerning for employers specifically. So it's not just about how workers feel, but actually how they're working. So, for example, we found within the data that more than half of people who currently work from home feel that how they collaborate with their colleagues has suffered as a result of the disruption to how they work. So, that shift to remote working, for example. And half of people said that their work-life balance has suffered as well. So I don't think that's surprising, but we saw elsewhere in the survey that people placed huge importance on being able to separate their work life and their home life. And so it's really vital for employers to be aware of this challenge, this fact that people, as you touched on, feel that they're unable to clearly differentiate between when they're working and when they're focusing on home things in the way that they used to be able to. I think, I mean, as with all of the findings, you know, that we've talked about here, this isn't revelatory. It's not something that we weren't aware of. But again, it's really invaluable to be able to validate what we inherently, you know, feel ourselves, what I've been feeling myself, and being able to see the extent to which it's affecting Canadian workers across the country and, you know, regardless of role. And I think, you know, there are learnings for how Canadians, employees, perhaps can help improve their own kind of the way they work and how they feel about video meetings and so on. But there are also insights there that are probably important in helping employers and businesses really better understand and support their employees through what continues to be incredibly challenging times.
All right, thanks, Nick. And I just wanted to follow up. Why is data collection more important this year than ever?
It's not a huge surprise, it's not a huge insight to say that at the broadest level, we've seen huge tectonic shifts this year in how businesses operate, how employees work, and how they function within organizations, but also at a really basic level of what people are doing day to day, week to week, and so on. So consumption habits have changed, for example, and we know that there are far fewer shopping trips. There is less purchasing overall, but some sectors have been going, all guns blazing. More alcohol. People are buying really high-end bikes, like racing bicycles. Small luxury items, things like quality facial creams, that kind of thing. Purchases of those have gone through the roof. All of those are, fairly straightforward and things that we understand. But it's not just those examples. We're also seeing fundamental shifts in societal values and norms. Things like, what does socializing with your friends and family look like? What counts as personal space? If you're stood in an elevator where previously you'd be like, okay, fine, well, someone's giving me personal space. Our mindset, our definitions of what that is have now completely changed. Even things like, the fun, like the emotional appeal of eating out at a restaurant, that shifted as well. Obviously, a lot of this behavior can be captured with passive data. So things like spend figures will prove really useful. But there is an inherent weakness in those passive sources in understanding the why and the how of people's decisions. So those kinds of things, those social values, those norms, the fact that when you watch Netflix and you see people hugging on a TV show and you're like, you can't do that. That's the kind of thing that you just can't capture through other data sources. So response-based data, asking people what they're feeling, what's motivating them to do or not do certain things, it's vital at this time.
No, I agree. It's funny looking back to obviously just 2019. It feels like ages ago, but looking back to that past year, and you think of now the new norms this year, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I got on the TTC without a mask, or I can't believe I was touching the TTC and didn't sanitize immediately after, or whatever it may be. It's funny to kind of gaze back, and obviously that's why it's more important. Habits have changed, everything's kind of changed, and will continue to change moving forward as this gets better. All right, thanks, Nick. What's your biggest prediction for 2021 when it comes to market research?
I think overall, I see 2021 as being a pretty strong year for research for a couple of reasons. The main one is around this idea that, as we're talking about vaccines now, this idea that, hey, the world can go back to normal. But the truth is, actually, when you look at these shifts in behaviors, in values, that we don't know which ones are going to snap back. So some may go back to where they were in 2019, say car buying. Some may take a while to kind of unpack or unravel, such as restaurant revenues. People may take a while to be comfortable or as comfortable as they were going to a restaurant. And then others, to be honest, may never go back the way they were. So e-commerce, for example, and buying groceries online, I don't think we can expect that to go back to how it was in 2019. So there are, across each industry, really, there's a fair amount of uncertainty about what the new normal looks like and what people are going to be doing and buying and how they feel about it. And so it'll be vital for businesses to understand how people are feeling, what their intentions are, and which ways these different behaviors are going. And as we touched on, passive data can be really helpful to a point. But when it comes to understanding those motivations, those feelings of why people are behaving in certain ways, it'll come back to the basic, most powerful tools around response-based research, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. So personally, I foresee 2021 being a strong year for research, and particularly, significant investment into things like qualitative research.
No, I agree completely. Like you said, it's going to be a constant change. This is not going to be something that's stagnant now. Everyone's emotions change week to week. Obviously, with news breaking, whether it's vaccines or whether it's kind of high COVID cases, then kind of we have to push back, and everything's emotions are constantly in a roller coaster. All right, and thanks for joining me. That's the last of my questions in our continuing series of Delve In with Asking Canadians. And I look forward to helping you and your team moving forward in 2021.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right, thank you.